Susan had been married for 13 years, had 2 kids, and had become a successful realtor, one of the top sellers in her region, closing multi-million-dollar deals with ease. Her image graced local magazines, and clients requested her by name. Her days were filled with showings, negotiations, and closings, her nights with social events and quiet, calculated plans. But she spent as much money as she made and lived dangerously beyond her means, buying designer this and designer that, trying to keep up with the Joneses, never thinking about her financial future, and became angry when her husband suggested she put money away for a rainy day. Lately, something inside her had shifted. One evening, as they sat in the kitchen under the pale glow of pendant lights, she looked across the granite island at her husband, Mark, and said flatly, "You have no ambition." He blinked slowly, caught between surprise and exhaustion. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You work the same job year after year. No drive, no goals. You're just comfortable." He put down his fork. "I thought comfort was what we built this life for." She scoffed. "No, you built that life. I built mine." What she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that she had been seeing someone else. Someone who wore the best suits and didn't apologize for owning 3 vacation homes. His name was Julian, and he was everything Mark wasn't. Charismatic, ruthless, magnetic, and relentless. She met him at a closing 6 months ago. He was buying a penthouse for his company's expansion. Married? Yes. 2 kids? Yes. But when he looked at her, it was like he was daring her to want more. And she did. She wanted the jet-set weekends, the whispered compliments over candle-lit dinners in far-off cities. She wanted to feel like the woman she presented to the world, flawless, successful, desired, not just a wife picking up socks off the floor while her husband fell asleep to reruns. But the fantasy had cracks. Julian was married too. His promises were slow, like a drip from a leaking faucet. "Very often," he'd whisper, "things are complicated." And yet, she stayed entangled, comparing her husband's every move to Julian's grandeur, Mark's Toyota to Julian's Range Rover and his Rolex to Mark's Timex. While Mark was in the kitchen one night, she forgot her phone on the kitchen counter, and Julian texted her and said, "I am waiting for you at La Grandeur Hotel." Mark didn't confront her right away. Instead, he watched. He noticed the longer showers, the unexplained absences, the way she laughed when her phone buzzed, only to hide the screen as she typed back. When he finally asked, his voice was quiet. "Is there someone else?" She paused. Then, with the practiced calm of a woman who sold illusions for a living, she said, "It's not like that." But it was exactly like that. The house, once filled with coordinated decor and mutual dreams, began to feel hollow. Mark moved into the guest room. She didn't stop him. Weeks passed. Julian postponed another weekend trip. "My wife suspects something," he said, pouring scotch in a dim lounge. "We have to be careful." She stared into her glass, realizing with sudden clarity he wasn't leaving, not for her, not for anyone. And Mark, steady, predictable Mark, was slipping away, quietly packing his things into boxes labeled tools, books, memories. There was no anger in his movements, just a resigned kind of sadness. On the morning he left, he paused in the doorway. "You know," he said, "I may not be a millionaire, but I would have taken a second job, a third job, hell, anything, if you had just asked for more." But she hadn't asked. She had expected him to become someone else. Now, alone in the house she had once dreamed of, the silence pressed against her like a judgment. She still had the career, the car, the contacts. But when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see the woman who had it all. She saw someone who traded love for the idea of more and ended up with less. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tapped his name, Julian D., private. The name she had memorized but never saved under anything suspicious. The line rang. Once, twice, 5 times, then voicemail. She hung up before it connected. She waited an hour, then called again, but only got his voicemail. Her texts were left unread. She checked his social media. Nothing had changed, but something felt different. The same smiling photo with his wife at a charity gala still sat pinned to the top of his feed. Their kids, 2 adorable, perfectly dressed siblings were tagged in photos from last weekend's yacht event. Julian was with his family. Of course he was. It was Friday night, family night. Pizza, a movie, probably board games in the living room. The kind of life she used to have, except she had convinced herself it was boring. Too quiet, too safe. The irony wasn't lost on her. She scrolled back through their messages, the ones that once made her feel chosen, secret lunch dates, little photos of the ocean view, from his hotels, late-night wish-you-were-here notes that now looked strangely generic. Had he sent the same thing to other women before her? The realization sat heavy in her chest. The next morning, she tried again. This time, a brief reply came. Can't talk. Don't call again for now. Things are difficult. For now? That was all she got? She stared at the screen, waiting for something more, a follow-up, an explanation, but nothing came. Just the blinking cursor at the bottom of the chat, where the illusion finally unraveled. She had imagined him as her escape, her next chapter, but Julian was never leaving his family or the carefully curated world he had built. She was never more than a detour, an indulgence hidden in between meetings and school pickups. And she had sacrificed everything for it. Her home was silent. The guest room was empty. Her husband's cologne had faded from the sheets. No one texted to ask if she'd be home for dinner. No kids ran through the hallway. They were with Mark. Just space. Beautiful, echoing, soul-deep space. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the window as morning light poured in. Bright, relentless, exposing. This wasn't the life she had dreamed of. It was just the one she had chosen, piece by piece, lie by lie, until there was nothing left to build on. And now, for the first time in years, she had to face herself. Not the realtor, not the lover, not the wife. Just a woman in a house full of things, with no one left to sell the dream to. Not even herself. What haunted her the most, in the quiet moments, was the realization of how often she had dropped everything for him. She had 2 kids, bright, beautiful, still young enough to need her, but old enough to start noticing when she wasn't really there. And she hadn't been. Not when it mattered. There were weekends when she was called into an emergency showing, when in truth she'd rushed across the city to meet Julian for a few stolen hours at a luxury suite. There were recitals she left early, bedtime stories she skipped, soccer games where she clapped absently while her mind wandered, wondering if he would text, waiting for the buzz. One afternoon, her youngest had asked, "Mommy, why do you always leave when we're supposed to do something fun?" She hadn't had an answer. She forced a smile and gave an empty promise. "I will stay next time, baby." Julian never did that. Not for her. When he called, she ran, heels clicking, lipstick fresh, heart racing like a teenager. She moved mountains for minutes with him. But he? He kept his mountains right where they were. She began to realize the patterns. He was only available certain hours. If she texted certain times, he was apologetic. "Wife's still awake," he'd say. "Let's talk later." When she wanted to meet on a holiday, he was busy with family. When she hinted at future plans, trips, or anything that required real sacrifice, he artfully redirected. She gave up moments with her children to be with him. He never gave up anything. While things in her home grew colder, tension humming in the air like a wire pulled too tight, his remained serene. She imagined it, his wife laughing softly in the kitchen, their children doing homework at the table, his phone face down as he played the role of devoted husband. A role he performed very well, and yet, when he touched her, he made her feel like the center of the universe. He whispered things that felt real in the moment. So real, she ignored the truth standing right in front of her. Now that her own family was unraveling, she began to understand the cost. One night, her older child, barely 10, asked, "Is Dad not coming back because of you?" The words struck like a blade. She wanted to say no, to protect them from the truth. but the look in their eyes told her they already knew. Julian hadn't called in over a week. Not even a text. Mark hadn't answered her last message. And her children had started calling her by her first name when they were angry. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a warning. She sat on the edge of her daughter's bed that night, the air thick with quiet disappointment, and thought, what did I trade for a man who wouldn't even call me back? She had been a woman who wanted more, and now, for the first time, she truly had it. More regret, more distance, more silence. Less of everything that actually mattered. Her husband, Mark, was a good man. He wasn't flashy or ambitious in the way she once thought she wanted, but he had always been steady, always present. He never missed a game or a parent-teacher meeting. He coached Little League when no other dad volunteered. He made pancakes on Sundays and helped with homework on weeknights, even after long hours at work that drained him. When things between them got fractured, he didn't fight or throw accusations. He just quietly packed a few bags, found a modest 2-bedroom apartment near the kids' school, and made it clear that he would spend as much time with them as possible. The kids loved spending time with him because he showed up and was present. Meanwhile, Susan was still clinging to a broken dream, refusing to accept what she had lost, still chasing Julian, still convinced that if she played her cards right, he'd finally make space for her in his pristine, manicured life. Meanwhile, she missed weekends with the kids. She missed birthdays and came up with flimsy excuses, then promised to make it up to them, and didn't. When she wasn't glued to her phone waiting for Julian to reach out, she was attending networking mixers and client events, clutching her champagne flute like it was a lifeline, smiling through the growing emptiness. She told herself it was all for business. But the truth was, she was running from her guilt, her loneliness, and the realization that she had gambled everything on a man who had already returned to the safety of his wife's arms. And then 2008 hit. The market collapsed like a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Listings dried up, buyers disappeared. Her phone stopped ringing. She had over-leveraged everything, convinced the boom would never end. Properties she had bought as can't-miss investments suddenly became anchors. Her savings were bled dry, paying mortgages on homes no one wanted. Foreclosure notices arrived like clockwork, first one, then another. The luxury SUV was repossessed, her office lease terminated. Her brand, once synonymous with success, became a cautionary tale whispered at real estate luncheons. She called Julian, left voicemails. I need to talk. Please call me. It's important. Nothing. She emailed, more desperate this time. Still nothing. He had vanished like smoke in the wind. No goodbye, no closure, just absence. He had always kept his life separate, protected. His money, his family, his boundaries. She hadn't noticed until now how well insulated he had been, how she had given everything, and he had given only what he could afford to lose, nothing. And now she had lost everything. The final blow came when the bank repossessed her home. The place she had decorated with pride, now emptied room by room under the unblinking eye of movers who didn't bother to ask what happened. She stood on the curb in the rain, 2 suitcases, her designer heels scuffed, her phone silent, her name tarnished in the industry she once ruled. Mark heard about the foreclosure from a friend. He didn't say, I told you so. That wasn't his style. He just showed up at the curb with the boys in the back seat, watching her through the window, confused and quiet. He opened the passenger door and said, Come on, let's get you out of the rain. She didn't deserve it, not the ride, not the kindness. She hesitated, heart heavy, pride cracked. Then she climbed in. Before Mark dropped her off to her new 2-bedroom apartment, somewhere in the wreckage in her mind, she remembered what stability had felt like. and what love used to look like before she traded it for illusions that never showed up when it counted. Mark was slow and steady, always had been. He never chased trends or flash. He didn't care about luxury cars or exclusive clubs. He believed in saving, in planning, in working hard even when no one was watching. And while she was riding the wave of the real estate boom, he had quietly climbed the ladder at his company, moving into management, then into a higher-paying operations role. By the time the market crashed and took her down with it, Mark was making 6 figures. Nothing flashy, but solid, reliable, secure. He had started investing in retirement accounts early, made smart decisions with their old joint savings, and even bought a small rental property with a friend from work. He wasn't rich, but he was stable. He had a future. She had gone after the fast money, the image, the rush, and now she had nothing but memories of what she used to be. Mark had met someone too, a woman he'd met through his job, single mom, quiet, kind, with a strength that reminded him of who he used to be when things were simpler. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something. And for the first time since he left the house, he was starting to consider the idea that life might go on, that he might deserve to be happy. Still, deep down inside, Mark hadn't stopped loving Susan, not completely. It was a different kind of love now, not romantic, not full of longing, but rooted in history, in shared years, and 2 kids who still needed both of them. Maybe it was loyalty, maybe it was the part of him that remembered who she was before the ambition, before the lies. He visited her new place often, helped the kids with schoolwork at her kitchen table, replaced a broken faucet she couldn't afford to fix, made sure the boys felt like they still had a family, whatever shape it was in now. They had talked about divorce more than once. The conversations were always practical, calm, emotionless almost. But neither of them ever filed the paperwork. There was always something else to deal with: the kids, work, logistics. But also, unspoken between them, was the weight of what they once had. The fact that walking away entirely would mean admitting that it was really over. Not just broken, not just damaged, gone. And neither of them seemed ready for that. Some nights, when the boys were asleep and Mark lingered a little longer than usual, they'd sit on the back steps, drinking coffee in silence. Not as lovers, not even quite as friends. Just 2 people with a complicated past and an even more complicated present. "I got lost," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said. She nodded. "And you didn't." He shrugged. "I wasn't chasing anything, just trying not to lose what I already had." And for a moment, the silence between them felt less like distance and more like understanding. They didn't touch. They didn't talk about the future. But neither of them closed the door. Not completely. While all of this was happening, between the quiet visits and the unspoken wounds, Mark was changing in a way she hadn't expected. He was getting closer to God. It had started gradually. After the separation, when the apartment was too quiet, he'd picked up the Bible, not out of habit, but out of need. He had felt lost, angry, questioning what had gone wrong and how to move forward without bitterness. And in the stillness of those nights, he began to read. He studied what it meant to lead, not just as a provider or a father, but as a man under God's authority. He wrestled with verses about forgiveness, patience, and sacrificial love. The more he read, the more he realized how much he had relied on his own strength, and how little he had leaned on God through their marriage. He didn't try to preach to her, not at first. He just lived it. She noticed the difference, the peace in his voice, the way he was patient even when she was sharp, the steadiness that now seemed rooted in something deeper than just personality. One evening, after he helped the boys with a science project, he lingered by the door. "I've been reading the Bible a lot," he said, trying to understand what God expects of a man, a husband, a father. She raised her eyebrows. And? And I think I failed in some ways. I wasn't perfect. But I also think I stopped leading when I should have fought for us. I left you alone in ways that had nothing to do with being gone. The words stunned her, not because they blamed her, but because they didn't. "I've been asking God to show me how to be the man I was supposed to be," he continued. "Even if that just means being a better father now. I don't want to carry hate. I want to walk in grace. That's what he's calling me to do." Something in her cracked then, not because of his words alone, but because she had nothing left but God. The success was gone, the money, the status, the illusion of control. Her self-worth had been gutted. She had tried to fill the void with attention, ambition, and affection from a man who never meant to stay. Now she was broken, deeply, quietly broken, and trying to gather the pieces of who she used to be. So when Mark asked her what she thought God's plan was, she didn't scoff like she once might have. Instead, she whispered, "I don't know anymore, but I'm starting to think I need him more than anything else." He nodded. "Then start there. That's where I started too." And she did. She began reading scripture late at night after the boys were asleep. She cried through Psalms. She wrestled through the Gospels. She listened to sermons while cleaning the small apartment she now called home. Sometimes it felt like trying to rebuild a house from splinters. But other times, there was peace. Brief, still moments when the weight of her shame felt lifted, if only for a breath. She didn't know if God would fix everything. She didn't know if Mark would ever fully come back. But for the first time in years, she wasn't chasing the world's approval or a man's affection. She was reaching for something higher, something true. And in that, she began to feel whole, not because she had it all together, but because she had finally stopped pretending that she did. Faith didn't fix everything overnight. There were still bills to pay. Still awkward exchanges with the boys, especially the older one, who had built emotional walls too high for her to scale in a single conversation. There were still whispers of shame in her own mind, echoes of choices she wished she hadn't made. But slowly, day by day, she began to change. Her mornings started in silence now, Bible open, coffee in hand, her heart still bruised but open. She began journaling prayers, not polished ones, but raw, honest cries for healing, for wisdom, for strength. She read about grace, not just as a concept, but as something she could finally accept for herself. She started going to church again. At first, just her. Then the boys joined her and truly enjoy it. There was a small group for women at the church, other mothers, some divorced, some widowed, some just trying to stay afloat in the chaos of life. They welcomed her without question. She didn't tell them everything at first, but enough to feel known. They prayed over her. They gave her books, listened without judgment, reminded her she wasn't the sum of her worst decisions. And God, in his quiet, persistent way, began restoring her from the inside out. Mark noticed the difference. She didn't snap anymore when they disagreed. She made time for the boys, not performatively, but because she wanted to rebuild what she had once neglected. She showed up to their parent-teacher meetings, soccer games, school plays, and stayed the whole time. She began cooking dinner on the nights they were with her, not ordering out or rushing through. One night, after all four of them had dinner, Mark lingered after helping her clean the kitchen. "You're different," he said. "I'm trying to be." "I can see that." He watched her for a moment, as if weighing whether or not to say the next part. Then he spoke. I'm proud of you." The words undid her. She turned away, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Not because she needed his validation, but because, somehow, hearing it from the man she had hurt made the redemption feel real. They didn't jump into reconciliation. There were no declarations, no dramatic turning points. But healing came in inches. She began to ask the boys about their days and listen fully. She apologized to them, not once, but often. She admitted she had failed, but also promised that she was doing the work. And they, in their childlike grace, began to let her back in. Mark and the woman he had been seeing slowly drifted apart, amicably, without drama. He told her the truth. He still loved his wife. Not the woman she had been in her lowest moments, but the one she was becoming again. They still hadn't signed divorce papers. And now, for the first time in years, the idea of reconciliation wasn't terrifying. It wasn't about going back to what they had. It was about building something new, on faith, on forgiveness, on the firm foundation they had both rediscovered in God. One evening, after putting the boys to bed, Mark sat on the couch while she folded laundry nearby. The TV was off. The house was quiet. He looked over and said, "Do you think, maybe, God's not done with us?" She smiled softly. "I hope not." And in that quiet, broken, holy moment, they both understood. God wasn't done with them. Not as co-parents, not as individuals. Maybe not even as husband and wife. He was just getting started. They didn't rush it. After all they'd been through, they both knew that true healing takes time. So instead of diving headfirst into reconciliation, they chose something harder, to walk it out slowly, together. They started with counseling, not because things were falling apart, but because they wanted to build something stronger than before. A Christian counselor from their church guided them through the mess, piece by piece. They confronted the old wounds, her betrayal, his silence, their misaligned priorities, the broken trust. Nothing was off limits. Everything was laid bare. There were tears, there were awkward silences, but there was also progress. Their counselor challenged Mark to keep leading, not as a man trying to fix everything, but as a servant leader, the way Christ modeled. And she challenged her to continue submitting her pride, her fear, and her need for control to God, day by day. They prayed together, sometimes fumbling through the words, sometimes just sitting in silence before the Lord. But each time, they felt more peace, more clarity. Their boys noticed the change. Dinner at her place became less tense. Family game nights returned. Laughter came back, quiet at first, then loud and free like it used to be. The boys stopped asking why things had changed and just started enjoying the fact that they had. Then one Sunday, after service, Mark asked her to stay behind. They sat together on the back pew as the sanctuary emptied. Sunlight filtered through stained glass. He held her hand, gentle but sure. "I want to come home," he said. "Not just physically. I want to build a God-centered marriage this time. Not based on what we think love should look like, but what he says it is." Tears welled in her eyes. "I want that too, more than anything." They didn't rush into remarriage. They gave it months of prayer, of showing up, of seeking counsel. But eventually, with the blessing of their pastor, their boys, and a small circle of close friends, they stood before God and renewed their vows. This time, it was different. No lavish venue, no expensive dress. Just a small chapel, 2 sons standing proudly at their side, and the quiet awe of grace restored. Mark spoke first. "I promise to love you as Christ loves the church, sacrificially, patiently, without condition. I will lead with humility, listen with empathy, and serve you with honor. She followed, voice trembling. I promise to respect you, to follow where God leads you, and to build a home filled with love, truth, and forgiveness. I know who I was, but I also know who I'm becoming, and I'm grateful to become that woman with you. They exchanged simple rings, no fanfare, just the weight of sacred promises rebuilt on a foundation far stronger than ambition or emotion, the Word of God. After the ceremony, they went home with the boys, ordered pizza, and laughed around the kitchen table like a normal family. It wasn't perfect. It didn't have to be. It was real. They continued to grow, not just as a couple, but as a family under grace. They served together at church, joined a marriage group, mentored other couples who had weathered storms. Their testimony became a beacon, not of perfection, but of redemption. She still carried scars, so did he. But the scars no longer defined them. They were reminders of what God had healed. And in their little home, now filled with joy, scripture, and second chances, they gave thanks daily for a Savior who never gave up on them.